Hello, and welcome to another Registered Kettle, your chance to hear about the news from the people that write it. And it has been a very, very busy morning, and last night as well for our Australian office, as the world has trembled with not one but two outages. In fact, the first one was pretty light. A minor Azure outage, just a data center going down, but then CrowdStrike hit. And the effects have been catastrophic, quite frankly. Richard, you've been covering this right from the get-go. Can you fill us in? How bad is this?
It's really bad. I mean, this is, as you say, it was a tale of two outages. We had the initial Azure one, and then unconnected to that was the CrowdStrike one, which what happened was CrowdStrike, they pushed out one of their regular definition files on one of their channels to their Falcon sensor software, which kind of runs on lots of enterprise machines. You probably don't even know it's there. It just sits, it picks it up. It's basically antivirus software. And what happened was whatever was in that definition file caused Windows machines, I think it's Windows 10, Windows 11 machines, Windows 7, Windows 2008 Server not affected. Windows 10, Windows 11 and Server are affected, caused them to go into blue screen of death boot loops. And there was basically no way out of it. So what they did was, I think a few hours after they realized how bad this was, they quickly pulled the file. So there should be no more new installs of this particular file. That should have stopped hours ago now. And they published a workaround. Well, some of their team made known a workaround, which involved effectively going to the machine, booting it into safe mode, deleting a file, maybe tinkering with a registry setting, then rebooting, and the machine should then work. Which sounds great in theory, until of course you realise that means, well, there's two problems. One, it didn't always work, and two, you had to have a human being go to a physical machine to do the safe mode stuff. And if you do that, and your machine has been BitLockered, which many enterprises do use BitLocker to encrypt and secure their data on their workstation devices, you had to know where your BitLocker recovery key is in order to get access to the machine to delete the file.
So if you don't have your BitLocker recovery keys to hand, what's the result?
If you haven't got your BitLocker, well, I mean, if you
pretty much, it is. I mean, you've basically got to rebuild the system from scratch, right?
Exactly. You basically end up, because the whole purpose of BitLocker is to secure your system. You don't want people being able to hack in there and do things. But I mean, there are ways and means around it. But on the whole, you do not want people going, and that's why you use BitLocker quite correctly. And the advice is you keep a record of your BitLocker recovery keys in case this happens. So I think this will be a really good test, not only of a disaster recovery plans, but do you know where your BitLocker recovery keys are?
Yeah, it's also going to really muck up a lot of admins, probably, well, not just the weekend, probably the weeks to come as well. I mean, there's a phenomenal number of machines that have been taken out by this. I mean, Brandon, you've been looking around the world at various examples, and it's airlines, hospitals, even a Mercedes Formula One team.
Yeah, and credit to Mercedes Formula One team, right? They're CrowdStrike's one of their biggest sponsors, and they're in Hungary right now practicing for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Which, sorry, Ian, I'm not a Formula One guy, but I believe that's the championship, correct? Like the big race of the year.
No, it's it's one of the middle races, but the championship is certainly hotting up. Lewis Hamilton won for the first time in 3 years last race.
Yeah, and so it's kind of an important race, right? But now Mercedes' team, of course, being a major CrowdStrike sponsor, all their systems run CrowdStrike software. And so the entire pit was pretty much offline this morning, with the practice race coming up at 1:30 p.m. local time. I believe it's already passed at this point, and last I saw, Mercedes managed to actually get their entire system, all their systems restored so that they could race. So kudos to them for moving quickly. Obviously, being a high priority and very publicly profiled space, they're going to be able to move fast and have a lot of resources. But, good on them. For everybody else, sorry, it's going to be a lot the
NHS IT systems aren't the most robust at the best of times, and they're short-staffed when it comes to management. Airlines, even 911 calls have gone down in the US, it seems.
Right.
Yeah, it's real bad. Yeah, 911 systems are down, and even on a more like day-to-day level for people. Like I was reading the BBC had interviewed some London cabbies, and they said that 95% of their fares are paid via cards, and they can't pay, and no one can pay with a card right now. One guy was saying he'd already turned away several customers because they didn't have cash. Starbucks can't take orders, can't take online orders.
Caffeine fiends are going to be running wild.
I know, it's dangerous, right? We're getting to socially destabilization levels of chaos here. But it's like the bottom line is CrowdStrike is huge, right? They're massive. They have, but based on their own website, and I included an image of this because who knows if it'll still be there on Monday. But as of now, CrowdStrike says that they They have systems in 43 out of 50 states, 298 of the Fortune 500, 8 of the top 10 financial services firms, food and beverage companies, auto companies, tech firms, right? These guys are in everything. It really, when I woke up and started seeing this news this morning, the first thought that I had was, it was about Microsoft a few months ago, right? When I was talking to some people who used to work in national security in the government, and they were saying basically, they thought that Microsoft had risen to the level of a national security concern because it was so it was in everything, right, in the federal systems, and it had so much power over these systems that one security failure can lead to a destabilization or the leaking of some incredibly sensitive files all over the government, right? And then CrowdStrike comes along and does this too to all these Windows machines, and I feel like it's hard to kind of not see the parallels between this being a moment where everyone goes, do we need to reassess putting all our eggs in one basket?
Very much so. I mean, the tech monoculture this is a classic example, but we've seen it with SolarWinds. We've seen it with any number of third-party hacks. Once you get somebody into a dominant position, then the ripple effects on this could be huge. I mean,
yeah. And government, the federal government has pretty much chosen to, aside from, asking Microsoft some very pointed questions and not getting much of a response, right? They've chosen to pretty much ignore this. They keep dumping money into Microsoft. So I really don't know how much faith I have if this is going to actually be a wake-up moment for all these vendors to go, maybe we should consider diversifying our tech stack here. But it needs to be.
Well, that was the first thing I thought of when I woke up. I thought, oh, it's another SolarWinds. I woke up to all these alerts on my phone, and the CEO has come out and say it's not a cyber attack, but that was the first thing that came to my mind is this is going to be another massive supply chain attack. So it's hard to not see those parallels, and it seems like you would want to do something about it.
Well, it's not a cyber attack, though. You have been covering off that, it can very well become one because phishers are moving in. People are panicking. They're willing to take, much more vulnerable to these kind of attacks. So, I mean, you've just written a piece about this. What are SANS saying about it?
Right. So they're saying, almost immediately they started seeing phishing emails using this as a lure start hitting people. We haven't seen any specific samples at this point, but basically from what we're seeing, it's criminals moving in. They are purporting to send email updates. Apologies for my dog. Are directing people to these malicious domains that look like they're affixed, and then you either download malware from these sites. Some are even actually asking for donations in Bitcoin or PayPal to fix your systems. So again, warning, make sure you're going through the legitimate channels here, but any chaos like this, it just offers a huge opportunity for criminals to come in and take advantage of this with fraud.
No, this is it. I mean, because as you say, people have got the guard down and they're desperate for a solution.
That's it. That's
and when the solution is so piecemeal, right? It's very easy for someone to come and say, no, we've got the right solution. You don't have to spend, the next 2 weeks going into every single system and either following Microsoft's advice of just rebooting it till it starts working again, or,
that was a classic piece of advice from them. It was just like, okay, try turning it off and then on again.
15 or more times, right? Too, right? Like that's what they said. Some of our clients have been saying it's taken them 15 times or so to make this work. And it's like, my God, that's not just... That's what you do when you've given up entirely. You just keep rebooting and hoping something changes it. I don't see that's much of it's not a very valuable first string strategy.
Well, this is it. I mean, Richard, you've been polling admins on this. I should imagine they're furious.
Oh, yes. So admins are, yes. I've had a few admins get in touch, and they are, absolutely furious because, well, let's face it, it's the weekend. The weekend's gone now. The weekend's fixing time. One was telling me how he was having to actually speak to his operators on the phone and read out the BitLocker recovery keys in order to get them and talk them through the whole reboot process. And of course, these are people who aren't trained to do that kind of thing. These are these people who are trained to do one particular job. They're not trained to be IT support experts, because let's face it, this workaround is not a particularly straightforward workaround. It's quite complicated. You've got to navigate to the correct parts of the machine. You've got to know BitLocker keys. It's a bit scary. And so he was saying, I've got to do this hundreds of times, and it's just terrible. I mean, his estimate was his organization would probably still be partially down, certainly, or degraded until well into next week, just going through, unless a more robust solution comes out from CrowdStrike and Microsoft. And I'm not sure we're there yet. I mean, this does, one thing I do wonder is if this speaks to the underlying architecture of Windows itself, that there's some software like the Falcon sensor can run at such a low level and then be allowed to download and update itself in a way that leaves a Windows machine completely broken in this way. Because while it's not Microsoft's fault, I do wonder if this is an architectural thing that perhaps Microsoft need to look a bit harder at.
Yeah, I've seen a few people on Twitter basically saying, can we start reassessing whether giving these security applications access to the kernel level is a good idea? And it's like, yeah, obviously you've got to be able to detect things there, right?
Absolutely.
But clearly we've now find out that, one simple, I don't know what was wrong with the definitions, right? I'm sure it was more complicated than an apostrophe in the wrong spot or something. But, one simple push can take down half the computers on the planet.
However,
I think there's a lot of Mac and Linux users out there who are feeling very smug at the moment.
Well, they are.
I mean we usually do, but
yeah, they are. I've got a very good friend who's a Mac admin, and yes, he is very smug about the fact his Macs are all fine. But of course, they can't use any corporate resources because the servers are all down. So his Mac may be fine, email server not available, his authentication server not available. So his users, they can log, they can open their Macs and boot up, but they still can't do any work. Mm-hmm. So it's the sheer breadth of this outage. It's not just workstations; it's the servers as well.
I mean, some of the reports.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I mean some of the reports you're getting, Richard, like some companies are having 70% of their systems taken down by this.
Yes, I mean, you just have to look at some of the threads of rage on social media where you see people talk about hundreds of thousands of systems being taken down, and I can easily believe it because, of course, this channel goes out, the software is running on hundreds of thousands of machines. They're going to take it, and normally as an enterprise, you wouldn't take updates without first of all testing and going through some kind of test environment. However, in this case, you have tested the Falcon sensor. You think it's okay. You trust it to take its own updates because it's virus definitions updates. You need those as soon as possible. You can't test those. Mm-hmm. You trust it. However, when it goes wrong, goodness me, does it go wrong?
Well, I mean, this is it. I mean, CrowdStrike had a pretty good reputation, didn't they, Jessica? But this is going to really hit it hard. I mean, the share price is in the toilet, but their corporate reputation. Do you think this is a hit that the company can come back from? People will, let it go after a month or so?
I mean, that's the thing that's always hard to say. You initially think no, but then again, like Brandon was saying, you see someone like Microsoft who continues to experience these types of hits and does bounce back. So I don't know. At a certain point, they are so ubiquitous across so many agencies, corporations around the world. Is it really going to be that realistic to expect these companies just to rip and replace? Or are they just going to, have a horrible couple weeks and then move on? So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the question is what to replace it with. I mean, if you are trying to avoid this sort of solid ecosystem, which makes everyone more vulnerable, is the answer to look at smaller vendors, or is it just to sort of mix and match for various different systems?
I mean, that's a, age-old question too. Is it better to have multiple? Is it better to consolidate? Especially when it comes to security products, you hear the bigger vendors pushing consolidation, the smaller vendors obviously pushing for more diversity. But there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I saw in one of your pieces, Richard, an IT admin who was bemoaning the fact that they'd been working with another security company for years now with no problem, but corporate IT had insisted they shift to CrowdStrike, and were not pleased.
Yes, exactly. Although, again, I think much like many other vendors and many other incidents, there'll be a lot of quietness and silence about them from other vendors because, of course, they're but for the grace of God go I. Someone or some team has had a very bad day or very bad night last night, but I'm sure they aren't alone in those processes that caused this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you were raising about if this is an architectural problem with Microsoft, but do you also think it could be an architectural problem with CrowdStrike itself, or is this just one update which was just badly coded and improperly tested?
From what I can see and from what I've heard, I think it was mainly down to testing. I don't think there's an architectural problem with CrowdStrike itself, as compared to other vendors that run at the same level in the kernel. I think in this case, the question will be how did this faulty update get out there? What levels of testing did it go through before it went out? I'm sure that CrowdStrike will publish a post-mortem to explain what happened and how this happened. And then, as Jessica says, it'll be up to enterprises to decide if that's sufficient for them to carry on using CrowdStrike, or if they'll start to plan to use an alternative. But again, there is a whole frying pan fire argument in that, are you sure the person you go for instead of CrowdStrike is going to be any better?
Yeah, we just wrote a piece, or Matthew McConister, one of our reporters, wrote a piece last week, or I'm sorry, it actually went out yesterday, that firms skip security reviews of major app updates about half the time, right? I mean, so if they're skipping security updates, they're probably skipping other kind of updates or other reviews too. So, maybe not an architectural problem, but a process one.
Yeah, I mean, it was ever thus to a point. I mean, I can remember when antivirus software was coming out first, people were turning it off because it was slowing their machines down so much, and it's, and I know, Jessica, you've seen an awful lot of examples of people just, it's the smallest thing sometimes that can trip people up. Right.
I mean, exactly. It's just one of those things that we continue to see. It's CrowdStrike today. Who knows who's going to be next, but it's something that the industry needs to address for sure.
Absolutely, exactly. Yes. Well, it's been a very fun morning, it's got to be said, from our perspective as journalists, because, there's a lot to write about and a lot of angry people wanting to talk. But I think you're right. I think we are going to find ourselves in this position again with another piece of code. It's maybe Microsoft, it may be a third party, whatever. We will be here again. But we will also be here again next week, of course, for another Kettle episode. We've got some interesting topics coming up, so stay tuned for those. And of course, you can get the audio version of this from your favorite supplier. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us.